Routines suck for most ADHD women, and I want to talk about that because it's important that we are doing things to love ourselves and care for ourselves, but the way we go about it with ADHD is ineffective, and then we end up feeling like shit and shaming ourselves because we're not able to do it. So in this video, I'm about to share my self-love ritual that I do every day, but before we get into that, I'm going to address the things that we do wrong, the way that we go about it that doesn't work for our ADHD brains, so that you too can be successful in finding a self-love ritual that works for you. So if you're tired of being tired, if you're tired of being stressed and overwhelmed, and you want to do stuff to feel better, but you just can't get yourself to do it, then this video is for you. Let's get into it. A lot of ADHD women I've worked with, have spent time with, tend to struggle with routine. I personally do okay with routine, but I think it actually stems from a very rigid Catholic upbringing and fear. So I'm not thinking that's a great way to learn to bring routine into our lives. So I just want to acknowledge a lot of us can really struggle with routine. And there's a reason. Our ADHD brains need things to be interesting for us to continue to do them or even do them the first time. And what can happen with routines is the novelty wears off, they can get boring or stale, there's not enough variety. And when we think of it as routine, like self-care as a routine, it becomes a chore. It becomes one more thing on your long ass to-do list that is way too long to begin with that you have to make time for. Otherwise, you're like a bad person or something. I don't know. And that mindset about it is what's getting in the way because we think it has to be this big complex thing in order to take care of ourselves. We think it has to have all these pieces and be perfect instead of just finding ways to carve out time to help ourselves feel more alive, to help our ADHD. And to do that, we need to switch from these boring routines instead to something that is just focused on loving ourselves, creating a ritual. There's something sacred about a ritual versus routine feels like something you have to do. Now I have to do this and now I have to do that. And it can really be hard for a lot of ADHD folks. Whereas instead, if you're focused on how can I love myself today? That's a much different question versus what do I need to do? So just even starting to shift into that mindset is a really important piece. The other thing that makes this hard is so much of school, which was aimed at neurotypical brains, was about routine and doing things a certain way. And that is not how our brains work. Sure, I'm not saying our brains can't do routine, they can. It's just that we need to do things in our own way. And when things are imposed on us from the outside, or we're told, oh, well, if you want to concentrate better, you got to do this, then we end up with a crap ton of PDA, right? Persistent demand avoidance, where we're like, well, now I'm not doing it, not even if I wanted to. And so, in some ways, we have parts of us that are working very hard to protect our woundedness from being ADHD because so many people have bossed us around and criticized us. And maybe even they didn't. And maybe if you're like me, you masked through overachievement and high functioning. So maybe you just were so busy trying not to have people do that, that now you're tired. And so, in order to do something different, it's important to find ways to love yourself, love your brain, love your body that are fun and interesting to your brain, that have some sense of novelty, creativity, a challenge, or other things that are interesting for the ADHD brain, but also that it's easy, that there's not a lot of friction in the way, especially when you're first building up this sacred ritual of caring for yourself. Because when we start too big, which is common with ADHD, we tend to be all or nothing kind of folks. And when we go too big, we get overwhelmed. We're like, I can't do it. I can't do this. I can't meditate because it's too much, or I can't exercise because it's too much. Whereas if it's like, let's make it simple so that your brain doesn't get overwhelmed. let's find ways to help you do things to help with your ADHD. And so I'm going to talk about my I tend to do it in the morning. Morning doesn't work for everyone, and morning is relative. It depends what time I get up, right? This starts when I get up. It's not a given time. But I've created over several decades a lovely self-love ritual that really I didn't even realize at the time is a way to help my ADHD brain navigate this neurotypical world more effectively and efficiently with less stress. And that doesn't mean I don't get stressed, and that doesn't mean I don't get dysregulated. It's just that I find doing this is so much more life affirming for me. It feels loving to myself. And when I don't do these things, like if I have a day where I literally cannot get time in for these practices, then I notice a shift in how I feel that day in my body, in the not quality of my thoughts, but just the way my brain is that day. I'm more forgetful. It's harder to focus than usual, all kinds of things. So, let's get into the what to do. And I'm going to break down each of these things and how they might help you because not all of these are going to be effective for you. And let me just be clear. I built up this ritual over decades. So this isn't something you're going to do all these things starting tomorrow. You might pay attention to the ones that sound like they could help what you struggle with the most and start with that one thing and make it small and as simple and easy as you can. And we'll get into that. But first, I'll share the different elements. And I'm just going to go in order of my self love ritual because if I don't, I'll forget. So, when I wake up in the morning, this is actually new. I don't even know how much of my self love ritual this was intended. But what started to happen about 9 months ago, perhaps as my perimenopausal symptoms increased, I noticed a need to lie in bed longer during the transition from sleeping to waking. I was a person who my alarm would go off, I'd get up and just get out of bed right away. I had read a long time ago in my 20s, like 30 years ago, that hitting the snooze button was actually worse and made it harder, made you more tired, and so that you just need to get out of bed. And lately, I have found it much more self loving to allow myself to ease into wakefulness. And what that's done is created this sweet space where I'm kind of waking up, but I'm having these beautiful thoughts come to me that seem almost like downloads from the universe. It just seems like this potent information or love coming from maybe outside of myself, maybe it's my highest self around what steps I need to take that day, or how I can best serve you, or what would bring me joy that day. And so I've been allowing myself to have just a little bit longer transition. Sometimes it's 5 or 10 minutes. There's some days it ends up being 45, but then I have to cut the rest of my ritual short. So, what I've been trying to do as I've entered my 50s here is really pay attention to what my body needs. And some of that requires self awareness and connection to our body, which can be something that a lot of us with ADHD don't have because we may have had to turn off signals from our body so that we could do things the neurotypical way and stay out of trouble and not get as hurt or reactive when people would criticize us or judge us because we were, quote, doing it wrong. So, we'll get into the building awareness piece, but I'm finding this transition is helping me regulate more as long as I stay off my phone beyond my gratitude journal. During that time, I will do my gratitude journal. I use an app for that. Basically, it's just bullet points. And the reason I started doing a gratitude journal, this was one of the first things I started doing besides exercising regularly. Gratitude journals help our thinking, they help us get into more positive mindsets. They help us be more grateful in general, which then helps us manifest and attract things to us that are wonderful. And it also can help stave off depression because what happens is there's a part of the brain, your anterior cingulate, that searches our environment to help protect us from threats. from negative things. And sometimes, especially with depression, we can get into a downward spiral of that part of the brain working overtime. Alex Korb, in his book, The Upward Spiral, which the subtitle's long about changing the course of depression one small step at a time. But anyway, he's a neuroscientist. And in his book, he talks about how having a gratitude journal, thinking of three things every single day for which you're grateful, at least three things, can actually start to change the course of depression. It can also help our ADHD brains because then we're not ruminating as much on the negative, and instead we're focused on what we're grateful for. This isn't a Pollyanna approach to living. I'm not suggesting, for those of you who are too young to know Pollyanna, I'm not suggesting our gratitude journal. We're like, yep, everything's great. I love it in my life. It's fantastic. But rather, noticing what we do appreciate. When I first started doing this, I wanted to get three things and I would end up with like six. And what I noticed is for a while, those things were the same thing every day. And that got boring. And so what I started to do to make it interesting was look for other things in the environment that I was grateful for, whether I was seeing a butterfly. This morning I saw a cardinal while I was doing Zumba, looking for things to be grateful for, looking for the beauty, looking for those moments that are special and expressing gratitude. I do have my go-tos that I always express gratitude for. Certainly my loving family and other things and people that I'm grateful for in my life. And each day I try and look for additional things because that's what starts to shift our brain into noticing all of the amazingness that we actually have. And if you're having a hard time, one thing you can always go to is indoor plumbing, heat in your home if you have it and it's cold outside, food to eat, even if it's not your favorite foods, but recognizing some of those things that, yeah, okay, they're not big things, but it's something that you have that maybe other people don't, and you can be grateful that you have those things, even on really shitty days. The thing I do after my gratitude journal is I write 3 pages. Sometimes I only do a page or two, depending on if I laid in bed a little longer or what my schedule's like. But I heard of doing morning pages. It's something Julie Cameron talks about in her book, The Artist's Way, as a way to increase your creativity, which as an entrepreneur, increasing your creativity is really important because we write a lot of content, we do a lot of videos, we have programs. We're always working with people and need to creatively problem solve. As entrepreneurs, we need to creatively problem solve because things come up and we got to figure out how to handle them. And so, yes, I find that those 3 morning pages really help with that. But I've also found 2 other benefits specific to my ADHD brain that actually I think are even more important. One is that it helps me work through because you're just free writing. It's not planned. You're just literally, you don't even have to finish your sentences. Grammar doesn't matter. Spelling doesn't matter. Legibility doesn't matter. Sometimes my brain goes faster than my pen, so I just get down what I get down. It doesn't matter. And what sometimes will happen there is number one, I'm able to just empty out my brain of all the gunk that our brains are like swirling about that's just not even important. But two, also, because our brains are sticky, when we have negative experiences, especially relationally with another human, we can get triggered into our RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, or even just have big feelings about it and we can spiral. I find that doing that morning writing can just help me get it out of me. And even in doing that, because I like to work with the parts of myself, what I find starts happening is I'm like, oh, a part of me is feeling this way. Well, that makes sense because this. And I find myself working through a lot of those big feelings just on my own without even planning it because it's just a time of free writing. And so if you are someone who is having a gazillion thoughts that go a mile a minute or struggling with really big feelings, one option for you might be to start with morning pages or evening pages, especially if you're having a hard time falling asleep, getting that stuff out of your head before you go to bed, if your thoughts are what's keeping you up at night. So that might be an option that you choose. The next thing I do after that is, and I don't always do this one every day, but I find it really, really helps. I read something from a spiritual text. So for me, that often means yoga books. but it could be anything. It could be something by Richard Rohr. Right now, I'm reading Tantra Illuminated, which talks about the householder path of yoga, which is called Tantra. And so I just read even like a couple sentences, sometimes a paragraph, sometimes a page. But reading something like that helps me remember that I am bigger than what's going on in this life. That there is more to me than just my physical body and the day-to-day happenings. And so if you're someone who is getting overwhelmed by world events or by stress in your life, just even reading a little snippet from a spiritual text can sometimes help you ground into like, oh yeah, okay. This isn't all there is. This is just what I'm experiencing in this moment in my human body. And it helps us get that perspective. This could be any spiritual text. If you're Christian, it might be your Bible. If you're Jewish, it might be the Torah. If you're Muslim, it could be the Quran. It could be anything at all. It could be a Celtic text. It could be something from Native American tradition. Whatever spiritual means to you, I find that as a helpful practice. The next thing I do is some breath work. And I do this before I meditate because I find that if I do this practice, it actually, I don't want to say makes meditation easier, but because meditation doesn't have to be good or bad, it just is. But for me, I feel like I'm better able to focus and sustain my attention after I do the breathing practice. I tend to do one that's called Nadi Shodhana, that's the Sanskrit name. In English, it means alternate nostril breathing. And that's a balancing breath. And so I find it really balances my energy. And then I meditate. So let me go back to the breath work. Breath work, if you're someone who's having a hard time with being regulated, if you feel really imbalanced, you can use breath work as something that you do every day to help yourself. And it doesn't have to take long. My Nadi Shodhana practice is about 2 to 2.5 minutes. After that, I meditate. I got into meditation back when I thought my ADHD was anxiety. I had a therapist who was really into mindfulness meditation, and I started doing it with walking or running, and then eventually indoor cycling. And if you've ever heard me talk about it, you know there was a journey there. Now I do seated meditation, but I just want to talk about most people with ADHD seem to have an aversion to the word meditation. So hopefully you're still listening. And I get why, because everyone talks about meditation like it's supposed to be a time when you stop your thoughts and you have this quiet, peaceful brain. And that is not true. the First of all, if there is a point to meditation, it's not to completely quiet your mind. I mean, that might happen if you meditate for a longer period of time, like 30 minutes or more. Maybe. I don't know what the threshold is for some people. It's just that for most of us, especially if you're meditating less than 20 minutes, which most of us do, you may not find that slowing down of the mind. And that's okay. It doesn't have to, because the whole thing is when you are meditating, even if you're doing like mindful toothbrushing, right? You don't have to meditate on a cushion like I do. The point isn't to focus the entire time. The point is to try and focus the other time. And when your brain, which loves to think, even if you don't have ADHD, gets distracted, you go, oh, yeah, that's right. I'm supposed to be focusing on brushing my teeth. Or I'm supposed to be focusing on whatever you're choosing to meditate on, which for me starts with a mantra and then with breath. And the reason I choose to meditate, I mean, I meditate for a lot of reasons. One of them is spiritual. But to help my ADHD, we know that a regular meditation practice, even after only 12 weeks, it's been shown that novice meditators have improved the part of their brain that pays attention. So, if we want to improve our ability to direct and sustain attention, meditation or mindfulness practices is the way to go. So, if you're someone who's really struggling with directing and your focus and sustaining attention with concentrating, then finding some way to incorporate mindfulness meditation is going to be a great self love practice for you as part of your self love ritual. I have another video I did on mindfulness, and I'll make sure that that's the end screen of this video so that if you're interested, you can look at that. After that, I get my body ready, like teeth brushing, all that kind of stuff, and then I exercise. I started exercising. Well, I've been exercising my whole life, but as a kid, it was just playing and sports and dance and things like that. in high school, I started running just a little bit. And in college, I got more and more into running and eventually group fitness and teaching group fitness, and then eventually weight training. And what I have found is so I have hyperactive type of ADHD. I have found there is nothing better than some movement that gets that energy out and helps me be less restless the rest of my day. And then it also helps me focus better. I'm less fidgety when I exercise, and it gives me more energy. So if you're someone who has an aversion to the word exercise, know that you don't have to use that word. It's just about movement. And with ADHD, it's even more important to find movement that you enjoy, that you find pleasurable. So for me, I do Zumba and I lift weights. And then on 2 days a week, I do this like hit workout with some Zumba before it to warm up. And first of all, you might have noticed that's a crap ton of variety. Yeah, because otherwise I get bored. And I do all these things that are fun and fast moving, so nothing is super long. HIIT workouts, high intensity interval training are great for ADHD because you do something for 30 seconds, you do another thing for 30 seconds, you do another thing for 30 seconds, and then you rest for a minute. And then you do that again. And then you do that one more time, and then you do another set of 3 sets of exercises, and then you do a last set, and it just goes super fast. And so for my ADHD brain, that's great because I'm not getting bored standing there. So if you are someone who finds yourself restless in your body, hyperactive in your body, you have a hard time focusing, but the thought of meditation makes you want to run the other direction or vomit, maybe, I don't know, then movement can be a really nice practice for you. The other thing I will add about movement is a lot of our ADHD brains tend to get into chronic stress relatively easily because we, first of all, have a really hard time saying no, and there's many reasons for that I unpack in other videos. We say yes to a crap ton of stuff, yes to ourselves and yes to everyone else, and that means our plates are full. And sometimes our brains are not functioning as well as they do other times. And so it might feel like we don't have as much time as other people to do stuff. So we can just feel super overloaded. And so that can create a chronic stress type of situation where we're vacillating between overworking and shutting down, and crashing, which is the fight and flight and shutdown responses, vacillating between the two. And what that can do is cause a buildup of biochemicals in the body that are there to help us fight or flee. But a lot of times, because we're not running from like a tiger or anything, we're not using those biochemicals. The most effective way to get rid of those biochemicals or to use them up is movement. So getting in regular movement also, 30 minutes a day of regular movement also then can help you keep from getting burned out and keep you from chronic illness, nervous system wise. After I exercise, I do a little bit of yoga. And I'm not going to lie, sometimes I do one down dog and I call it good. And lately, for the past several weeks, I've been trying to get myself to do at least 5 to 10 minutes and have been getting around 10, sometimes 15, sometimes even 20 most days after my what I call exercise. Yoga is also movement, but for me, yoga provides something else. It gives me an opportunity to slow down, to breathe with my movement. It regulates my nervous system, and it can do that for you. And it's also a time for me to connect with spirit because yoga is a spiritual practice for me. So if you're someone who is amped up or anxious, or your body feels really tight and uncomfortable, I mean, that's another reason to practice yoga, you might consider doing some yoga. It doesn't have to be this big, long thing. Just even do a little bit. So after that, I get ready and I leave. And then when I get home in the evening, I take time to record my daily wins and just list a couple, maybe 3. And then I read and find that's all super regulating for my nervous system. And that happens if I'm able to avoid social media and actually get myself to read. So I hope this gives you some ideas. Here's what I don't want you to do. I don't want you to listen to these ideas and be like, yep, Jen says I need to do all these ideas. No, in fact, I am telling you not to do all these ideas. Pick one thing that you don't already do that you think would help your ADHD the most, that would show you the most love, and do that. And even just do it like 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, just to start to build the habit and make it stupid easy so that it becomes obvious that this is what you're going to do. There's no barriers to you and the thing. Set everything up so it's easy, it's obvious, and then make it interesting. Because if it's not interesting for the ADHD brain, you're not going to stick with it. This is my self-love ritual that makes me come alive. That makes me at 51 have a tremendous amount of life force energy and an ability to just feel good in my body and feel good in my mind and feel connected to my highest self and that compassion. So I would love it if you'd share comments. If you're someone who you're like, yeah, Jen, that sounds great, but this is really hard, share a comment. Comment that. I'd love to give you some ideas. And if you're not already subscribed, please hit the subscribe button because I'd love to have you around. Take care.